Let's go!
We beat Monster Hunter Wilds last night, full completion, so all the main questing is done. We killed everything. We saw it all introduced. All the cutscenes are over now. Now it's just up to its endgame content, like actual endgame content. So I spent a bit of time waiting for this because I didn't want to necessarily do a review before the game was out, and I wanted to wait till it's out and in the public because a lot of things that can happen with an online game change severely when there's a huge amount of people that are playing, and you kind of get the grasp of what it's like to meet up with people and team up with people and all that kind of stuff, right? I waited till after, and I wanted to experience all this stuff with my chat, much less get the first-hand experience of how this stuff is with people, so that's why I didn't do a review ahead of time. That being said, for people that don't know who the hell I am, we've been playing a few of these Monster Hunter games, obviously, since World. I loved Rise, thought it was great. Didn't do absolutely everything in Rise, but that game's content was a little, like, sporadic in terms of how it was distributed. And we've gone back to older games like Monster Hunter 1 and Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate and are really impressed by games like Generations Ultimate, but we only got to high rank in that. So, that being said, any criticisms that I might have and also glowing praises about Monster Hunter Wilds comes with just a little bit of perspective as someone that hasn't played the entirety of this series, but definitely has a little bit of a, you know, a nibble of what classic Monster Hunter is and what new age Monster Hunter is from World and beyond. But that being said, dude, this is like comparing FromSoft games. There's like 8 million people that bought this shit in the first 3 days. On average, 1 million to 1.5 million people playing it in its first week. Outside of several technical and performance issues, that was still the case. There's a reason for that. There's a reason that Monster Hunter has become mainstream, and it's that its gameplay hook, its overall game design is so powerful that it is such a captivating experience, almost regardless of how it looks, how it performs, anything that can come in between you and that. It's so good. And it's kind of hard to explain that until you get in there and you have it like grab you. It's such a fun game. And even going back to games that are literally ports of 3DS games or they run on the Switch at 30 FPS, Monster Hunter seems to sink its claws into you and you get hooked after, dude. And I'm happy to say that's 100% the case here, man. 100% the case. This is like comparing FromSoft games. You're pretty much arguing some of like the toppest tierest games that the industry has to offer. Like some of the best games that you can get in the video game space right now. And you're pretty much just arguing like, so which one's really the best? Like we have some 9s, but which one's the 10? This one's a 9.5. This one's a 9.8. This one's a 10. Like that's kind of what we're arguing here in comparison to most of these like Monster Hunter games. So any criticisms I have, I deeply respect this series and I think it's awesome, but that comes with some caveats and some concerns. But let's talk about the things that I loved about it and the thing that is just the best. The combat. And I'm going to speak just sort of generally what the developers were focusing on here. I feel like there's a lot of issues with previous Monster Hunter combat in many ways. You kind of like engage the monster and disengage and reposition and do all that stuff. Positioning and repositioning, obviously a huge deal in old school Monster Hunter games and even in this one. But that was kind of at a expense of a severe amount of playtime. It takes a long time to get really good at positioning to the point where that skill gap has sort of been reduced a little bit. I would say at the expense of some of the monster behavior. So now we just get this amazing focus ability, like the way you damage monsters and hurt their wounds and the way you engage with those wounds and then manipulate the monster. It's so good. I feel like I'm actually fighting this monster and staying engaged with them until they literally run away, which is why when monsters run away in this game, it feels so painful. I'm like, I'm fighting you, come on. And then they piss off. It's funny because they don't want you to kind of like let your guard down. They want to give you the abilities to guard, to dive, to dodge, instead of like literally disengaging and run away. And the only time you do that is when you get hit and you have to heal, which is typical Monster Hunter stuff. But some of the changes they made to some of these weapons, man, are just crazy. Like you just stay engaged with this creature, and if you have the timing and the beats down and you've memorized the moves, dude, we're seeing kill times going under like minutes, like literal like 2 to 3 minutes for some of the hardest monsters in the game. These bitches are getting hunted. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We compare this where it's like, okay, so the game's obviously like in many eyes too easy. In my personal opinion, I think the difficulty was just about right. However, I can feel that the difficulty was just about right because I have gotten carded and monsters one-shot you and you just get destroyed by certain attacks. It's like, yeah, you get messed up at times. But I will say, I wish the monsters survived more. Kind of wished that the average hunt wasn't under like 10 minutes. I wish the average hunt was under 15, and then some of them can get extended even to like 20 in some of these situations. Monster Hunter World, another game, right, that we're directly comparing this to, is just kind of like the sequel directly to Monster Hunter World. That game can have pretty long hunts, anywhere between like 20 to 30 minute hunts. We kind of went back and checked it out last night just to see, just a comparison, like what's really different about this game in comparison, like, because it's hard to imagine that after you're playing this. Yeah, without focus mode, I'm like, whoa, dude, this is really messing me up. But I spent like a third of a hunt running. I spent 1/3 of a hunt running around as the monster went from place to place to place, and we just had to pursue them. And there's no way to pursue them faster. Anything I had to gather took more time because I had to physically move over there and grab it. And I do think that is significantly better, man. Like, that you don't have to engage with just like running, and you can manipulate the environment and grab things so quickly. The Sacred really saves a ridiculous amount of time, and it feels like they want to keep you engaged with the monster more. I think it's a great thing. Outside of that, I think the game visually can look really good. I think it can be just an absolute splendor to look at, but it's really time dependent. It really depends on what season that area is in, and even in some of the inclemency seasons, right, where there's just like a whole bunch of weather, they can look really cool, but it really depends on certain times and situations. Long story short, I think overall, like, I had a great time with this game, but it's hard as a Monster Hunter player not to look at it and then directly look at the previous games you've been playing and sort of compare them and take things from here and there and realize what's really good. For example, we play Generations Ultimate not even that much. I kind of realize why people might not have loved Monster Hunter World immediately as it came out if they came from a game like GU, because the combat is significantly almost worse in many ways. It's kind of nuts. Monster Hunter felt like it went backwards to like a more grounded, really rooted, limited sort of weapon play style in comparison to GU, which is just crazy. It's the Capcom versus SNK 2 of Monster Hunter games. You just get so many options combat-wise. But still, like, that's fine because the game was doing for an entirely different thing. Those players had that perspective, right? They had the perspective of like the previous games and what you could do in them. With that being said, dude, the combat I absolutely adore, but I do agree, as much as I think the difficulty is pretty good, I do wish monsters just lived a bit longer. I just wish they survived, even at the highest degree of the game, just an ounce longer. They need about like 20 to 25% more health, just in general, to feel like I'm engaging with them and witnessing their moves. Like, it's like, I don't think I've seen all the moves of all the monsters in the game at all, just because by the time you beat their ass up, they move to the next area, and it's like, dude, we were here for a minute, and then they get to the next area, and like, we were here for 2 minutes, and then they're done, and it's like, whoa, what the heck is going on? So that's definitely a criticism. But at the end of all things, and it kind of ties into the multiplayer as well, so much of this game feels single player focused. And I don't mean around one individual person, I mean like, it doesn't really feel like the game wants you to play multiplayer as much as some of the previous games did, even though some of the previous games did have a bunch of multiplayer issues and stuff. And yeah, I'm almost gonna like take a step back and let you know that the online functionality in this game can work really good when you make a squad. It can work really good when you figure out how to use link parties and environmental links and stuff like that. But getting to that point can take several sessions, can actually take sessions to figure out what I have to do to get in here with my friends. It is obnoxiously cumbersome to get to that point, and it kind of blows my mind that very obscure Japanese multiplayer still got worse somehow in Capcom's biggest flagship title. It's so weird to me. That's a big criticism. It should have been much easier than a game like even Monster Hunter Rise, but at this point, like, Monster Hunter Rise has the best like online functionality and getting together with each other. It's just easy. It just makes sense and it's easy. But still, the focus of the single player throughout the entirety of low rank and the majority of the game is interesting to me. And I've played a little bit of this game outside of the single player. I'm sorry, outside of multiplayer. I was playing a bit of the single player on day one, and I sort of realized, I'm like, oh, this is enjoyable, but I kind of want to play with people. I kind of want to discover all this stuff with people. At that point, we ran into several issues of just figuring out how to matchmake with people and cutscenes and yada. I think we all know the issues there, but the game was just so much more fun. Such a significantly more enjoyable experience. But that first low rank feels like it doesn't even want you to engage with multiplayer. It feels like they specifically want you to just jump in and start running around and guide you here and there and have a really focused campaign that gets you from point A to point B, show you how this works, show you how that works. Here's this new area, here's that new area, walk and talk sequences. It feels like it doesn't want you to engage in multiplayer yet. Like, that's too intimidating. And I genuinely disagree with that. So much so, and this has happened in previous Monster Hunter games, I think this game should have had a straight campaign mode. I think there should have been like a story/campaign option, bam, and you enter that and you get what is effectively the story, right? You get like the low rank story in some way, and it acts as a completely separate mode, unique from what the regular multiplayer is. You can still play it with other people, sure, if you want. The campaign itself feels like it's the village quest in previous games, and the hub quests I think need to exist, where it's like, okay, you have a single player campaign and then, you know, multiplayer. I really would have liked it if multiplayer had you just unlocking monsters with your friends and discovering stuff and not really having the big walk and talk of all that kind of stuff. It makes it sort of confusing about how they're approaching this. In the same way, solo in this game is mad easy. It almost feels like until you get people that are like really good and understand how this stuff works. I've tried a few solo hunts. Bro, the monsters are dying almost faster than they are in multiplayer because of however they're calculating the scaling. Like, it's very bizarre to me, to the point where it's like, I can see where some people would have like a lot of criticisms of this game's difficulty, because I didn't experience a lot of the solo stuff, but I've jumped into a few hunts just randomly without even good gear, and it's just bam, they're dead. Okay, well, we're near the end game. I'm like, interesting, okay. I feel like it probably has been that way for several games, but at the same point, the difficulty isn't exactly an issue for me, because still, you can get messed up, right? I don't think the difficulty is, albeit that much of a problem, even though I am hoping for stuff in the future that requires a bit of coordination. I do hope that eventually happens. So yeah, we have a game that is very like single player focused in many ways, which is an odd thing that you have to like wait to get to this point to kind of play with people, and that's sort of what high rank provides to you. But ultimately, you get to high rank, you get through all the quests in the game. I don't want this to be a spoilery kind of thing, but I kind of like what this game is setting up for in its highest rank. I may not agree on the monster selection that they give you at the highest rank here, but to that degree, I have the comparison of Monster Hunter Rise and especially Monster Hunter World Vanilla, and I have to like kind of revisit those thoughts in my head. We did not want Monster Hunter Vanilla Endgame. I remember specifically that going through that experience and being like, this sucks. Like, we have to kill all of these elder dragons and stuff for decorations and shit, and we have to like investigate things constantly and look up tracks just to get the right ones, and that's just for monsters that drop a bunch of decorations. And it was decoration grinding to the point where we're not even grinding for gear at all. Gear's not even important. We're just going for deco farming, and that deco farming has horrible drop rates, dude. Just abhorrent drop rates, and the melding around it was not particularly good. Like, that changed pretty quickly, like within a month after, and they started introducing more stuff to World. So where we're at right now is that vanilla aspect, and to give the devs credit, I kind of like what this is doing. I love the investigation stuff, and I like what they're doing at the end game of high rank right now. I'm having kind of fun putting things together, collecting materials, finding monsters. I think that is cool. I don't want to spoil things of exactly how it is. So I think it's probably one of the best end games in Monster Hunter in like 10 years or something like that, at least from the modern age of Monster Hunter. Criticisms though. We love the combat. How the game unlocks itself and what you do with it is just premium Monster Hunter shit. But there's 3 pillars of this game that kind of blow my mind and make this game feel like it lacks focus. And I'm sorry for the pun. You get 2 weapons in this game. That's a massive change. Like a big change from previous Monster Hunter titles. You get this interconnected world, environments that naturally connect from one place to the next. Every single biome connects to the other biome. You can just like run there. Crazy different from Monster Hunter. Even like obviously zone loading in the old games into biome loading in Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise. They're connected now, dude. So that's crazy. And then also their ridiculous weather system, inclemency and plenty and all the stuff in between, just a ridiculous amount of environmental visuals and looks all over the place that are going to change to every environment. It feels like there's like 4 different zones to every zone visually, and those are big changes. So crazy environmental changes, interconnected world, and dual weapons, massive changes to like Monster Hunter in general. They're all fluff. Like, I never found there to be a reason at all after killing everything in the game to switch weapons. And even if you do switch weapons, what happens? Well, I'm switching weapons and I don't have the gear for that weapon. even if I wanted a gun build, right? Just to shoot something out of the sky, I pretty much have to switch the crappiest gun build because I have a gun with the gear of a greatsword. That's not particularly great. The game never really sets up a situation where that's really important either. It just gives you the option to do it, which is neat. You kind of just run two of the same weapon, you know? The other one is interconnected worlds. And as much as there is like an assumption that this game is an open world, it is not. I feel like a lot of us thought it was going to be that. It's not. People are like, it's kind of an open world. No, it is not. It's barely even a connected world. That's all asterisks, dude. If you want to go from zone to zone, you have to like traverse, even on Sacred, like 10 to 15 second long corridors. Very linear corridors that just go from one thing to the next. They're barely connected. If they just shot me a loading zone, then it would have been fine. It would actually be faster if it just loaded to the next area instead of like progressively loading it as I go through this very long hallway. And those hallways can get longer and longer and longer depending on how further you go. So wait a minute, like there's really the only time we ever use this interconnected world stuff, it isn't like if I fast travel that changes the time and it takes more time so by the time I get there the monsters could be gone. No. There's no reason to not fast travel. There's no incentive to travel between the zones outside of a story thing. And even in the story, it's kind of like, oh, we're in a desert and then we go through a cave and we're in a forest. Or we're in a forest and you go through a cave and you're in a nice place. It's like, okay, you know, all right. The camps being connected is cool, but at the same point, it's like, I have some criticisms with the camps as well. It doesn't have the same feel of like a big hub where you have everybody sort of like meeting and gathering. And that's because the game has no gathering hub as of right now. And last but not least is the weather. Funny enough, the weather only does negative things to the player, it feels like, until it clears up. And it's like, oh, thank God. I would have loved the weather in any of these biomes or situations to really give me unique things thrown at me. That is like, you have to take advantage of this right now. The weather just changed. Bam, go do this thing, go do that thing. All the environments have traps like constantly all over the place. They all have these things that you can engage with and heal yourself with and buff yourself with, which is not that different. And they don't really change positions. As an example, just some random bullshit. The first area, when there's a big lightning storm, it would have been awesome if like I can harness the power of that lightning storm, but I can either get struck by lightning or the monsters I'm fighting can get struck by lightning, just like randomly. So that does happen, but it also is like a bane to me. I can also get messed up by this. But it would have been neat if you go to like one of those lightning spires and it collects the energy and you can somehow gather the energy of the lightning spire and it gives you something good, right? Where maybe if it just gave you something powerful where there might be some hazards to these areas, but maybe those hazards are like a risk reward where it's like, this is very risky to be out here right now, but you could also really mess them up. Right now it's like, yeah, you get like lightning bugs. Every once in a while, there's some things that happen in some of these areas, but to be real, like the game has this big weather system and it can be really gorgeous and it can be really impressive looking, but it doesn't do enough to feel like this is game changing, right? This is, oh man, we're just in a completely different game here. This is wild. I really wanted that to be something substantially different. And the game really never does much with that outside of just like waiting. It's just sort of there. It just sort of exists and you have to work around and you have to wait for this kind of weather for that thing to show up, you know? My biggest problem with it, and now we're getting down to like the meat of where many criticisms are going to be, all that weather stuff, all this interconnected zones and environment stuff comes at a cost, and that's performance. It's come at a direct cost that the game doesn't necessarily run particularly well. And the visual upgrade from Monster Hunter World is not substantial enough where those changes to what this game is offering feels like it's worth it at extreme performance loss. And yeah, I see why interconnected zones and all this weather stuff, like this is a big deal, but man, when all this windy shit kicks in and there's like a big monster you're fighting, poor people's computers, if they're from just a few years ago, are hard breathing on the floor, hands and knees going, is this over yet, please? And then the weather comes back and you get 30 more FPS. That's the biggest criticisms we have of the game, is that in many ways, as we play through the story, and I didn't even mention the story stuff, it's all right. It does, I think it's great for new players, but for me, it just left me kind of wanting to get through it faster. None of it really brought me to a point where this is like super crazy different than what they're doing. There's some interesting lore things that they do with it, and I do like some of the twists that they do with it, but it is not nearly as like campy fun of a story. This game feels weirdly serious in many ways. And they try to add some humor with your Palico and the Wudwuds here and there every once in a while, but a little bit of like the campiness and like, I would say the humor of the game, which is something I've even complained about in the old games. I feel like they hit a really good stride with that in like Rise as well as World. And the whimsy, yes, that's the best word. The whimsy has been mostly reduced. It lines up exactly with what the rest of the game is doing in terms of making it more grounded and like a personal story about this hunter on a journey, meeting new people and all this stuff. It feels like the story is more constrained to follow a hunter that walks and talks and speaks and responds to other characters, and then you address their concerns and you act as like the superhero of this story, right? Instead of being a sort of like no-name hunter that doesn't talk and you're just sort of like engaging with this big epic playground around you, which is kind of what a lot of the previous games do. It goes for something that feels much more, I would argue, westernized. I hate to use that description about it, but it feels like a direct response to just like build a bigger audience in general, even though the audience for Monster Hunter was so profoundly big. Like there was so many people that played the previous games. It feels like we're just gonna bring you through this stuff and try to create an experience that is a bit different and really puts the players in the shoes of a hunter, you know, instead of you just engaging with monsters and doing all that kind of stuff. Long story short, I think the story is like a 7. To be real, if I was to judge the story itself, it has a couple of cool moments and some things that I did like, but most of the time the characters talk just for the sake of talking. There is a couple of characters that are good, but nothing really substantially changes so much throughout all of it, other than the fact that I kind of enjoyed it. People are being really harsh and they're saying like it's a 4. I wouldn't go that low, but yes, there's a reason why many people are skipping the story entirely. You have to realize that also includes gameplay, and at least for me, I do appreciate that they did something that tries to include new players. Biggest criticism, they had to include a campaign mode, dude. They really should have included a campaign mode. To me, I don't mind that it's there, but I find the execution of it not necessarily the best. This seems like it was a very expensive thing to do. Like this would have boosted the price and the budget of this game a lot, and it will be good for new players, but that new player experience is going to directly involve them in how they see the story and how it works, and it's not like great. It doesn't really do a lot to introduce you to its world and really change things and make you so invested in characters and all that kind of stuff. So the game's doing great. Game sold like 8 million copies in 3 days. And once you're done with that story, you get to enjoy like the most fun aspect of Monster Hunter, which is engaging with monsters, which is actually fighting monsters, which is actually, you know, going out, looking for them, following them, beating stuff up, doing all that stuff, because it's friggin' amazing. I feel like once you get to that point, it is premium Monster Hunter shit. The other thing is that when you're in the story, dude, the first 5 hours of the game is you looking at the environments actually at their worst. And this has been a thing that's been criticized a lot. And it's something that I also was saying in the betas, where it's like, dude, we're looking at these environments and they're literally drab, wet messes for the majority of the time we are there. And then we have to wait till high rank until the sun comes out for the most part in many other places, which is a weird call. It's like, what the shit is going on? Anyway, I like certain aspects of this game. I think some things in World were obviously done a bit better. Just in general, I feel like World is more of an epic game, right? I hate to use that word because it's generalized. The way you engage with the environments, something I kind of missed, even though there is some big jumps in this game. I think that I miss the big, huge environmental interaction stuff that happens in a game like Monster Hunter World, where it's like, oh yeah, you get swept off this 2,000-foot waterfall, or you get sucked down this, you know, vacuous sandstorm, like sand slide thing in the Wildspire Waste. Like there's some big crazy things that sort of happen. There's a lot more traps in Wilds, but setting up those big epic moments, which feels like World tries to do a little bit. Dude, the sand thing happens in Wilds, but not nearly as good. Like you just fall to like one floor below. It isn't really like a giant moment. It just sort of like can happen. It's not the same the way it takes place. And even if it was the same, it's just the same thing as World. World feels more grandiose. Yeah, more grand. The introduction of the weather and the inclemency and all that kind of stuff is where this game is quote unquote epic, where it's grand. The sweeping, the weather changes, like all that kind of stuff. That's where this game really tries to introduce something substantially different than the previous game. And to me, it's hard to go back and look at a game like World and put yourself back into that shoes because it was my first Monster Hunter game and all that kind of stuff. However, I can criticize that I'm not just a weird nostalgic bitch. I was really impressed by GU. I was really impressed by that game. Some things about it, even though we only have like 15 hours of playtime in it, even playing it in 2025 was like, damn, bro. This is nuts. This game's really friggin' cool. Like, holy shit, dude. And even those environments, which were made for a friggin' 3DS, upscaled, look amazing. And I'm like, wow, this is sick. How are all these environments so cool looking? Like, what the hell's going on? So it just makes me kind of want to play that game more, which is nice that these games still all coexist. And we've experienced most of the content that's here. So I'm just going to come back to it and have a lot of fun with it. The craziest part will be the combat, dude. Going back to old Monster Hunter games without the combat of this game is going to be very difficult to get used to, but I do like that they are different. I do like that these games are very different, but ultimately speaking, I think Wilds, at the end of it, I would critically give the game around a 9. I think most of the Metacritic score is about right, but that is almost at the behest of what is the biggest problem of the game, which is performance. I think performance is a really big issue. If you take in for example, and like most of the stuff that's been going on, the performance of many people and even my personal takes, I think it goes down to somewhere between an 8 to an 8.5. And the reason my personal review is a bit lower than what I think the critical review is, that's because even though the gameplay's really good, I was expecting a game that significantly ones up itself over Monster Hunter World. A game that feels like a lot different than World did. And instead it feels like we're sort of like adjacent to it, right? Instead of being up here, it's kind of like right over here. The combat is the thing that's so good, but it feels like there's other things in World that I kind of like a lot more in terms of just like functionality and how it works. Jesus, the interface of the menu, dude. Number one, I went back and I just played it. Selecting items, using the radio menu, using the menu itself is so much better in World. What the hell? I don't get it, dude. I do not understand. Like even choosing how to pick items and stuff like that and using the wheel, for some reason, it just naturally flows in Monster Hunter World and feels better to use. I don't get it. So it's like weird things like that. I'm like, why did this get worse? Like this is the same crew. This is the same development team. Like why did some things go down in some way? Either way, it's still worth playing. I would arguably recommend, if you don't want to deal with many of the issues of the PC version, I would try the console version. The PlayStation version obviously doesn't have great textures, but even the PC version, if you use the high texture pack, has big problems right now. It's definitely a recommend. If you're already a Monster Hunter fan, dude, you're one of like the 8 million people that played this shit before. You're probably one of the people that jumped into this already in the first 3 days. But if you're someone that's worried, like, is this a good Monster Hunter game for me to jump in and try out, outside of obvious some technical and performance stuff? It is. It is definitely the game that is designed for that. It's a game that's quite literally designed to help a new player out, jump into this journey, jump into this experience, just sort of like have fun and learn in that way. And maybe not as much a group at the first get-go. Like the low rank experience is not particularly great with a group. That being said, I have a few more things I want to do in the game just to have fun with it, and I'm very much looking forward to the updates. I think there needs to be an arch-tempered difficulty because we need to get the health of some monsters up like 20-25%, dude. I need to see the movesets of these creatures before they die. That's pretty much it. I don't have an issue with the difficulty as much because we're spending more time fighting the monsters, but it just feels like the mons just go down a bit too quick, and it would be nice to see their actual movesets. I'm hoping that happens. I'm hoping in the next update when they obviously add a gathering hub.